We are going to be recording this. It will be recorded and posted online later on. My name is Mike Corey, KI1U. I'll be your moderator tonight. I am the Emergency Preparedness Manager here at League Headquarters. And we've got a great panel tonight, if I can get the slides working. As I mentioned, myself, Sean Kutzko, KX9X, the Media and Public Relations Manager here at League Headquarters, will be joining us. Julio Ripoll, WD4R, the National Hurricane Center Amateur Radio Coordinator, the station known as WX4NHC. Bob Robichaud, VE1MBR, the Warning Preparedness Meteorologist. Bob, I think I got your title right, correct me if I'm wrong, at the Canadian Hurricane Center. And Rob Macedo, KD1CY, Director of Operations for VoIP WeatherNet. Just real quick, some housekeeping issues. We will have a Q&A session at the end. You may send your questions to me as the moderator at any time. They will be posed to the appropriate presenter as time permits during, so we can kind of get ahead of the game a bit, but we will focus the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to your question, and there's a good chance we may not, in previous years we haven't been able to get to everybody's question, but we will do our best. Shoot me an email at ki1u@arrl.org, and I'll make sure those get forwarded to the appropriate presenter. This webinar, as I said, will be recorded and posted online later. Look for an email announcement, I'm sorry, not an email announcement, a web announcement on the League website, Twitter feed, and so on. We'll also make sure it gets posted in the ARRI's e-letter and the usual media sources. Despite what the times say on the registration, we don't plan on going to 10 p.m. We've just got to reserve these things in hour-long blocks, so we've got the webinar until 10 p.m. We're hoping to wrap things up by a little after 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And this is an informational webinar, not necessarily a training session. This is not a session that is sponsored by the National Hurricane Center, National Weather Service, Canadian Hurricane Center, or any other official entity. It is an informational webinar from the American Radio Relay League, so no certificates, ID cards, or anything like those, anything else like that will be issued for attending. But this is for your information, so you know going into this hurricane season, who the amateur radio players are that are active in hurricane response. So, quick rundown of the agenda. We're at the welcoming remarks now. We'll lead off with Sean covering the PR and media relations side. Then we'll move into amateur radio at the National Hurricane Center. We'll go then to the Canadian Hurricane Center. And, you know, as many of you are aware that not all hurricanes are Caribbean, Central America, and Gulf Coast. Especially in the last 5 years, we've had some significant storms come up the East Coast and affect the Maritimes of Canada. Finally, we'll go to Rob with VoIP WeatherNet, and he'll also provide some meteorological information regarding hurricane season. And we'll finish up with some questions and closing remarks. There were 2 presenters that were scheduled, but unfortunately, due to very last second circumstances, they could not join us tonight, and that's Bobby Graves, KB5HAV from the Hurricane Watch Net, and Dennis Dura, K2DCD, who is going to cover situational awareness for hurricanes. He's also with VoIP WeatherNet. We will make arrangements with both of them to record their presentations, and we will post those later. They will be separate from this one. We just don't, at the moment, have a means to take theirs and integrate it into this one after the fact. So we will make sure that their presentations get presented. So with that, I'm going to back up to that. I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter, Sean Kutzko, KX9X, ARRL Media and Public Relations Manager, or Public Relations and Media Manager, something like that. So give me just 1 second here, and I will turn it over to Sean. Okay, KX9X, the mic is yours.
Very good. Thanks, Mike, and good afternoon, good evening, everybody who is joining us this evening. We're very glad that you could attend the 2015 ARRL Hurricane webinar, and we hope you get a lot out of it. You're going to hear some really excellent information from a lot of experts on weather and hurricane situations and storms, but I've been given a couple of minutes to talk to you about public relations and outreach efforts during a storm for amateur radio operators and ARRL groups in particular. Whenever there is an activation, we always want to jump straight to being on the radio, because that's where, of course, our training kicks in and we feel that we can provide the most service to our served community. But it's also very important to remember that during a storm, during a hurricane or some other emergency, while we all want to do this, we need to have somebody to do this job as well. We need to make sure that there is a designated person in your group to be the spokesman for your group and get information out to the media. And that is where the public information officers and public information coordinators come in. It's very, very important that we have that role filled during a hurricane. In most hurricanes, amateur radio's involvement in a hurricane situation can be quite limited. The first 48 to 72 hours are normally when we will have the opportunity to provide the most services and communications support during a major storm. Once standard communications are restored, the chance for amateur radio to get highlighted in the public drops very, very quickly after those communications are restored. So it's very, very important that amateur radio groups get the information out about what they are doing to serve their communities while the event is going on. It's much more critical that we get coverage in the media while the storm is going on rather than an after-action report. For the media, after-action reports equals old news. Now, obviously, it's very, very important that we provide the communications that we can to serve our communities and provide the relief that amateur radio can provide in these situations. But it's also very, very important that we have somebody tell the story to the media so that they understand and can appreciate the services that we are offering. A public information officer's responsibilities, the number one responsibility is to be available to the media. That's the underlying task of the public information officer. It's also very important that the PIO be proactive within their group. They need to gather information from their group as to what their group is participating in and being involved with, and distribute that information out to the media quickly and accurately. Another critical component of the public information officer in these situations is to keep representatives of the ARRL field organization as well as ARRL headquarters informed about what your group is doing. In those circumstances, we can help get the information out about what your group is doing to serve the public during a storm. It's also very important to be articulate, be well informed, make sure the information that you are providing to the media is accurate, and be professional. Part of being a professional when interacting with the media is to make sure that you can dress appropriately. As much as we may not like to admit it, appearance is credibility in circumstances like this. So it's very, very important that you put a good image forward when you're interacting with the media. A successful PIO has very specific actions that lead to that level of success and make sure that the message gets out properly. One of the best things that you need to do right off the bat is to establish relationships with your local and regional media representatives before an emergency hits. That way, if an emergency occurs in your area, you have already developed relationships with the people who can tell the story about what your group is doing to help. It's very, very important that during the emergency you explain exactly what amateur radio's role and what your group's role is in that emergency to your local media representatives. And also be sure to provide that information in a very timely and reliable way. I know I've said that 3 times now, but that's very, very critical. The media need to know what is going on, and they need to make sure that the information they are receiving from you is credible. Be sure to document your group's activities. This can come into effect not only during the emergency, but also after the emergency. Video and audio recordings of your group in action providing service during the storm. Photos. You can never take too many photos, and with the access that we have to video and audio recording and cameras, It's easier than ever to be able to document your group's activities almost without thinking about it. You have the ability to capture that on your smartphone, or if you have an external camera, you can capture it that way as well. Press releases, getting information out to the media in a timely manner. I know that's the 4th time I've said that now, but it's absolutely critical that the media be aware of what your group is doing in a timely manner. And one of the ways that you can do that is to engage in social media. If your group does not already have a presence on social media, this is a very inexpensive and effective way to get information out to the media and to elected officials in your area. Get a Facebook page for your group, get a Twitter account for your group, and then use the power of social media to connect with reporters and officials in your area. You can friend them on Facebook, you can follow them on Twitter, and then you can post status updates and photos and video and audio recordings of what your group is doing out to the social media realm. There are a lot of strategies. I only have a little bit of time. I strongly encourage anybody who is interested in the public relations aspect of a storm to go to arrl.org/emergency-work for more information on this. The after effects of your work as a public informations officer and getting information out to the outside world about what your group is doing is extremely critical. The data that you gather helps us at HQ, as well as you in your local area, to highlight the service that we provide to our communities during storms. The Science and Skill Report, the image that you see on the right of this slide, this is a report that was generated in 2014 that highlights various ways that amateur radio has been of service throughout our country in various communities in the last 2 years. And this information, this report, is being used right now on Capitol Hill to help secure the Amateur Radio Parity Act as a law in place that will help us get antennas in areas that are covered by CCNRs or HOAs. So this is a very, very important task of the public information officer. The data that you provide us can help us justify amateur radio's role in service to our community. You can get a copy of this report in PDF form for free off of our website at arrl.org/regulatory-advocacy. PIOs are absolutely a critical team member of your group. They do the service of making sure that amateur radio is in the public eye as well as on the minds of the lawmakers at every level. And as I just talked about, it's very, very critical that lawmakers and legislators understand the role of amateur radio in the emergency preparedness plan of your area and our country. If your group does not have a PIO in place, get one. That is one of the best things that you can do for amateur radio in your area as well as the country. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to talk with you. My name is Sean Kutzko, KX9X. You can reach me at skutzko, Kutzko, at arrl.org, or you can call me at 860-594-0328. I would be more than happy to talk about this if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sean, and we'll get the presenter changed back around, and some very good information there. Thank you, Sean, for presenting tonight, and you bring up some very good points. One of the things I want to mention is the importance of reporting in. Unfortunately, one of the biggest problems we have here at headquarters is hearing what folks are doing out in the field. ARRL groups have long used the field services forms, and we need to make sure everybody is reporting in. It doesn't have to be an ARRL activity. It doesn't matter if it's your club, if it's just a group of amateurs that go to your local National Weather Service office to help out. Turn in those reports. The key one is the FSD 157, Fox Sierra Delta 157. If you Google that, go to the league website, you can find it there. There's an online form that's going through a modification so we can get some more information, but definitely fill that out if you're active this hurricane season, because we want to hear it. We don't know what you're doing if you don't tell us. A couple things about social media real quick. Another one to keep in mind is ARRL_ARES. That is the ARES Twitter feed from League headquarters. Also, a hashtag that we're trying to promote folks to use is hashtag ARES activity. When you go onto Twitter, you can search, if you go up to the search thing, you can search hashtag and then whatever the hashtag may be, and you can see all the mentions. I just ask everybody, give that a try. Go to Twitter, search hashtag ARES activity, and you'll see some groups and how they're using that. And another hashtag to keep in mind is SMEM. That's Social Media Emergency Management. Hashtag SMEM. You know, put that on your on any of your tweets that mention amateur radio activity related to hurricane response. And one final thing we'll get to our next presenter. Don't forget youth. You know, youth are social media masters. Put that skill to good use. They're going to learn more about what amateur radio does. It's a good way to get them involved initially, and they can kind of be your social media PIOs in a lot of ways. And it's just building off a skill set that they already have. So just a few extra hints there. And with that, we're going to go on to our next presenter, which will be Julio Ripoll, WD4R, the amateur radio coordinator at National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida, WX4NHC. So give me just a second to change who's got the active mic here and who's the presenter. And Julio, the mic is over to you.
All righty, well, thank you very much. And let me, get the screen started here. Mike, is the screen showing okay?
Yes, it is. Looks good.
Okay, well, greetings from hot and humid Miami. My name is Julio, call sign WD4R. I'm the Assistant Coordinator for Amateur Radio at the National Hurricane Center. And you can find some of our videos on YouTube. Just do a search for WX4NHC. So last year, we only had a total of 8 tropical cyclones, and most of them were fish storms, except for, of course, Arthur that hit the Carolinas, and then, of course, hit the Canadian Hurricane Center almost dead on. And I'm sure that Bob from the Canadian Hurricane Center will have a few words about that. So far this season, we've only had 2 tropical storms, Anna and Bill, but don't let your guard down, even though the outlook is for a very low number of storms this year. It only takes one storm to change a community and change people's lives. In 1992, especially for me, was Hurricane Andrew. And that's what we call down here in South Florida the big one. And this one not only destroyed my house, but 300,000 other homes, all the way from the Keys down to up to the middle of the county there. And we had not only loss of homes, but businesses. It even affected the nuclear plant, and severe damage all the way around, and it took more than 10 years for most communities to recover. Then in 2005, we had another big one. This one hit the Big Easy up in New Orleans, and it was actually the deadliest U.S. hurricane since 1928, the Florida Okeechobee hurricane. And Hurricane Katrina killed 1,833 people and caused $108 billion in damages. That's nearly 4 times the amount of Hurricane Andrew in 1992. So Katrina, just as Andrew, became a landmark in time for those communities. And during Katrina, WX4NHC, with the help of a lot of relays from all over the country, stayed in touch with NWS Slidell office, not only during landfall and got live reports, but for 6 hours afterwards, helping with the health and welfare communications from the 41 staff members that were hunkered down. Well, this all started back in 1980 when Dr. Neil Frank wanted some ham radio operators to come in during hurricanes in the Caribbean to be able to communicate when they lost their forms of communications down there. So you can tell where we were located in that high-rise building on the 6th floor, the only floor with hurricane shutters. And this is our first station there. We basically brought in our radios from the club station from the University of Miami across US 1, sat it on a forecaster's desk, and threw a wire out the window. That was me back then. I was very young. And Dr. Neil Frank there. Our first radio was actually a Yaesu FT101EX, one of the old tube rigs. Then a few years later, we actually built our own Go Kit, and it had a couple Drake radios there, and it weighed about 200 pounds, so it really didn't go anywhere. First hurricane was Hurricane Allen, and that one was a Category 5 hurricane that hit the island of St. Lucia. And quick story there, St. Lucia was devastated, and they needed medical help, and there was a British hospital ship called the HMS Glasgow, which was nearby and could land but needed permission from the Prime Minister since they got independence from Great Britain. The ham operator there, which was Victor J69DJ, got the Prime Minister of St. Lucia on the air, and over 20 meters gave the HMS Glasgow formal permission to land and render aid. And a week later, it hit Brownsville, Texas, and basically the same thing as Katrina. We were the only communications between the National Weather Service there in Brownsville and the Hurricane Center throughout landfall. So then you think 20 years later we'd have, very solid communications of conventional means. Well, it happened again during Katrina. And you can see at the Hurricane Center we have a room that's walled off with sliding glass doors, and the media stays on one side, and on the other side is the heart of the Hurricane Center there. And there's some of the, there's Bill Reed, he's a ham, KB5FYI, ex-director of the Hurricane Center, of course, Max Mayfield. And they're on the phone talking to some of the people up in DC about what was happening. And here's some of the actual reports we got in and some of the things that we were requested to do. And with Slidell, we actually got their live reports, and after they lost all other communications. So in 1992, we got hit really bad. And as you can see right here is the location of the National Hurricane Center. And I lived right over here and right in the path of Hurricane Andrew. And of course, after that, it did severe damage to that high-rise building we were in. Everything was soaking wet. Everything off the roof fell down about 12 stories into the parking lot. So the government thought maybe it would be a wise idea to put the Hurricane Center in a hurricane-proof building. So in 1995, they actually did. And they built a hurricane-proof building to withstand a Category 5 hurricane, 10-inch steel-reinforced concrete walls with 20-inch concrete walls for EF5 tornado capabilities. They're disguised as bathrooms. So if you see everybody running to the bathroom at the same time, it wasn't a bad lunch. It was basically, you better get in there quick. So for a few weeks, the volunteer hams ran thousands of feet of coax, put up 7 antennas, and at the same time, 1995 had to be the busiest season on record for the time with 18 named storms. And by the way, the Hurricane Center has been through 2 more hurricanes. Katrina and Wilma both went through the Hurricane Center, and we actually were able to be in the calm of the eye for a good half hour, especially during Wilma. So we have a pretty good ham radio station there. All the equipment is donated by private companies. Our bulk of the equipment is donated by Yaesu. We run about 600 watts, and we do have 3 backup HF antennas. VHF, UHF all have independent antennas. And then we also have our digital communication side, and we do several modes. We try to do all of them. We can't do all of them at one time. We are limited usually to 2 to 3 operators at one time that will fit in the room, because we also share that room with everything you see on the internet goes through that room. That's where all the webmasters are. And our digital modes include Echolink, IRLP, HF and VHF APRS, and we've also been trying a little bit of DRATs through some D-Star volunteers. So when we're on the air, we have about 30 trained operators. They're specially trained. Some have been with us for 30 years. And we have worked over 100 hurricanes so far and spent several thousand hours on the air. So we appreciate all our volunteers, and of course, to complement that, all the volunteers that help us with all the relays from the affected area, which means everyone listening to this webinar. And this is a picture of our current director, Dr. Richard Knabb, and he is a very strong supporter of amateur radio at the Hurricane Center. And so far, he's been doing a great job because he's kept most of the hurricanes from hitting the Hurricane Center. And it's been very quiet so far. Dr. Knabb used to be with the Weather Channel, and before that, he was with the Hurricane Center for about 8 years as one of the lead hurricane specialists. And he had a very personal encounter with one of the hurricanes, Hurricane Adrian, which hit Central America. And the only information before landfall was from a sailboat using WindLink, sending in their weather data. And they couldn't believe they were getting all that detailed data. And finally, the next day when they were doing their summary, we contacted that sailboat again through WindLink, and they sent us the entire weather dump of their data there. And they actually corrected the landfall of that hurricane using amateur radio reports. So our purpose and goals, well, to collect weather data, surface reports from hurricane-affected areas in real time, and they're used by the hurricane forecasters. Provide backup emergency communications to and from the Hurricane Center if we get a direct hit in Miami. Provide hurricane advisories over ham radio when other sources are not available. And I'll put a note to that. We actually had one ham from the Yucatan, and I believe it was during Hurricane Michelle, who was providing the advisories he heard over 20 meters to their local AM radio station, and that was about the only source of information that they had for the people of that area in the small fishing villages there. They had a small transistor AM radio. And then, of course, to enhance and promote the accuracy and availability of surface reports, which we encourage hams to get some weather equipment, weather stations. And our goal is to help save lives. And as you can see, our flow chart is pretty busy and getting busier with all the new modes coming up. We're trying to integrate D-Star and DRATs at this time. We've experimented the last year or so with it. And very important are the live nets, which are the Hurricane Watch Net, and the VoIP net, which Rob will speak about later on in this webinar. All this information is posted on our website. This is many different ways that you can contact us while we're on the air, and we're only on the air when hurricanes are between 200 and 300 miles from landfall. That is usually the guidelines that we use unless there's a special request. A few words of the Hurricane Watch Net, and unfortunately Bobby Graves, KB5HAV, could not be present to do his presentation tonight. This is their 50th year anniversary, and I can't speak enough about everything they've done to support the Hurricane Center. Their nets are spread out through all the United States and Central and South America and Caribbean, and their mission is basically to relay everything from hurricane-affected areas so that when we cannot hear directly, they bring it to us, and we really appreciate their support. You can go to the website, hwn.org, and get more information. And the other live net that we participate in is the VoIP Hurricane Net, and that's on Echolink WX Talk, node 7203, and which is interlinked with IRLP mode as well. And I believe last year they also put in All-Star, and Rob can talk more about that. But give you people say, well, that's internet-based. Well, not entirely true. And one example in 2004, when Hurricane Ivan hit the island of Grenada, one of the hams in St. Lucia was able to hear them on 40 meters HF, but no one else in the States could hear them because the skip was not reaching us yet. So he relayed all his reports from St. Lucia over the VoIP net back to the Hurricane Center. So here again, everything got connected very successfully. And we also use other different sources of information, whether you have APRS, you can join our CWOP program and automatically upload your information every 15 minutes through the internet and post it on the NOAA's Mesonet website. And even if you're not a ham, you can do the same, and it all gets to the Hurricane Center. We're encouraging all hams, if they can, to please get a low-cost weather station, preferably one that will interface with your computer and allow it to beacon either through the internet or through your APRS equipment. Just a couple examples of some of the reports that we received and the forms we use. We do have an online web form where you can submit your own surface report, and it is printed right at the Hurricane Center, and we appreciate when you're able to do that. If you cannot get on the air and you still have internet, or you can relay somebody else's report that you heard, you can do it right there. And then we have a printed form, and this is what we use when we look at we handwrite our HF reports, and it's a good checklist of the basic data in the format that the hurricane specialists like to look at. So whether it's a handwritten report or our printouts, they all have the same format from top to bottom. And this is just one example of one of the reports we got from a station at a hospital in Texas, and this was through the VoIP net. And since we cannot be live on every net simultaneously, the VoIP net also uses a format where they put in the data in a certain way, and this is what the printout looks like when it's printed at the Hurricane Center. And like I said, last year we experimented with D-Star and their severe weather net, and they relayed all their reports using their DRAS form and through the efforts of John Davis, WB4QDX. And we're trying to formalize this relationship because I see that this is going to bring us another form of information that we may not have, either HF or Echolink. And we're trying to get them to formalize relationships, not just with Georgia, but all the way through Florida as well, and the East Coast, and hopefully eventually the Gulf Coast as well. So you can see how seriously amateur radio is taken at the Hurricane Center. Sometimes we sit there for hours. We get a handful of reports. Sometimes we receive hundreds of reports, but only a few are really notable. But when we receive a report or two that become vital in forecasting and tracking hurricanes, it makes their official report, the summary report, and it's a permanent archive for this storm. And here, Stacy Stewart, the lead hurricane forecaster, did one for Ivan. And basically it says, amateur radio ham operators throughout the Caribbean region and those working as part of the National Hurricane Center's WX4NHC and the Hurricane WatchNet team were indispensable in providing critical reports as Ivan moved through the Windward Islands and across the Caribbean Sea. So you can see how well they support the amateur radio efforts, not just at the Hurricane Center, but everybody involved all the way down the line to the station being affected by the hurricane, to the station relaying the information, all the way till it gets to us here. And this is something that our public officials and the public understand. You know, they may not understand what we do, building kits or doing antennas or going out on the expeditions, but when they see us doing public service and emergency communications, they see the value that we bring. So here's another little snapshot of a powerful hurricane. This was Hurricane Ike in 2008, and it cost over $31 billion in damages, and it killed 150 people across the Caribbean and Gulf Coast. And one of the pictures that really struck me was when I saw this picture of the single house left standing amongst flattened homes. And this is in Gilchrist, Texas. And I saw the interview with the homeowner, who happened to be a contractor. And he says basically what he did was he followed the minimum building code requirements and added more straps, more nails, and went up 2 feet above the minimum storm surge and flood levels. And you can see it saved his house, although I don't think I'd want to live there all alone like that. So you need to know the latest building codes that are minimum and do a little better than that. Maybe 10% could make a big difference. And of course, if you're in an evacuation zone, you need to make sure you know the latest approved evacuation procedures and follow them closely. So it's been 35 years of volunteering at the Hurricane Center. We've worked over 100 hurricanes. We've been under 8 directors, and we appreciate all your support. This is our latest picture of our ham ops at the Hurricane Center. And so we'd like you to join our mission to help save lives. This is why we do it. This is why we volunteer our time away from our families, from our hobbies. And we appreciate if you can volunteer to help people when they are in need. So for more information on how you can help the Hurricane Center with their forecasting and give them some surface reports, you can find more information on wx4nhc.org. On behalf of the WX4NHC team and the National Hurricane Center, we thank all the ham radio operators for all their volunteerism and their support for so many years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julio. And I'm trying something new. Julio, can you tell, does my audio sound any better than it did before?
Yes, sounds perfect.
Okay, great. I tried a different microphone combination here, and hopefully that'll make a difference. Okay, give me a second. I'm going to switch back to my screen, and there we go. Just a quick mention of these Twitter, the @ and the hashtags. Of note, Aries activity as a hashtag to mark something as an Aries activity. Hashtag SMEM for the social media emergency management. Keep an eye out in the trending column on Twitter for specific hurricane hashtags, such as hashtag Sandy, hashtag Ike, so on and so forth. Here's the 2 mentions to the league. ARRL_Aries and ARRL_PR. And there's VOIP WeatherNet's probably jumping ahead on Rob's presentation just a bit. If anybody else has got any hurricane-related hashtags that they know are widely used, feel free to send me those, and I'll make sure we get this screen back up with some updated hashtags later on. And Julio, while I've still got your mic open here, we did get a couple questions. Any ideas for low-cost weather stations?
Well, the 2 most popular ones are Davis and Peat Brothers, and the big difference is that the Peat Brothers model apparently does not need a computer to be able to send the data stream directly to the TNC, but they're both excellent models and very well priced.
Okay, and not sure what's going on here. And another. Okay, hopefully that did the trick. I guess not. Okay. Still having issues here with. There we go. Okay, and thanks, Julio. And I would add to that the new Davis weather station. the Vantage View. I've got one of those I'm working on a project with here at headquarters. About the basic station, a little pricier than say a dual band HT, or maybe right around the same price, around 250 to 300, somewhere in that ballpark. Julio, another question regarding the antennas at NHC. I'm guessing this is specifically the amateur radio antennas. What kind of winds are they designed to survive?
Well, we had some of the antennas, the verticals, were specifically designed for 150 mile per hour wind loads. The wire antennas, of course, those are our main antennas because they're flexible, and they survived. I guess the latest one was Wilma, where we recorded, I think it was about 112 mile per hour winds there, and survived without a problem. So, if you're in the area, in fact, we keep a roll of copper wire inside our desk at the Hurricane Center, so if everything goes south, we can whip that out, put it on the antenna tuner, and we're back on the air. So wire antennas are, one of the best things to use when you have a high wind load in the hurricane area.
Okay, thanks, Julio. And you do bring up a good point. I can't say enough about having good wire antennas. I had that experience myself with Hurricane Gustav in 2008. You definitely want wire, not just a wire antenna, but enough wire to repair said antenna afterwards. And and keep in mind that when you need to be heard, a compromised antenna is not a solution. Have a tuned antenna. A tuned dipole is one of the best things you can possibly have. I know we try to get the most bang out of the buck, but quite honestly, when it comes to hurricane response, severe weather response, in times of disaster or emergency, you don't have room to compromise, and your antenna and radios are no exception to that. You want to make sure you've got a radio where you can be heard. If you have the ability to do so, make sure you got an amp. It's not a time to try out your QRP rig, and make sure you've got a tuned antenna, or better yet, one with some gain. It just does not work to have to compromise on your station when you absolutely need to be heard. I just want to make a couple comments before moving on to Bob Robichaud at the Canadian Hurricane Center. Julio mentioned VoIP WeatherNet. He mentioned Hurricane WatchNet, and and one thing that you'll probably catch from just about every presenter here tonight. We all work together. It does not matter what your acronym is or what served agency you're with, or who you're working for, but when it comes to amateur radio, we all work together. There is absolutely no room for turf wars and infighting when it comes to serving the public, whether it be during a hurricane or any other emergency or disaster. So you'll see a trend in everything that we do is we work together. We support each other, and we help promote each other because we've all got specific missions. And it's not just the groups here tonight. If you look outside of the representatives here tonight, Saturn, Mars, and many others, and even just local clubs, same thing. And at the same time, all tools. You don't say, okay, we're hams, the only thing we're going to do is HF or 2 meters. It is online, on the air, on the phone, whatever you need to do to get the message through. We're communicators, and that's what we have to do. So it's all tools available. Your toolbox contains everything at your disposal and everything that you've got the ability to do. So that's whatever is available to you. And don't forget, your license class is part of that toolbox. If you've got a technician class, make your goal to upgrade, because that spectrum privilege that you gain is part of your communications toolbox as well. Okay, I'm going to move along. I see we got a few more questions, and while the next presenter is on, I'm going to start sorting through those. And I did see we got some mixed results on my audio. Sorry, I'm dealing with a kind of a missing microphone here, so I'm trying to do the best I can. So I'm just going to stick with what I got for right now. So with that, we're going to go on to Bob Robichaud, VE1MBR, and just out of curiosity, if we got any other Victor Echo stations on the webinar tonight, just drop me a note. I'm curious to see how many representatives up north we have, and RAC members as well. So with that, Bob, I'm going to as soon as I can find you here, I'm going to turn the program over to you. Okay, Bob, there you go.
All right, thanks, Corey. Let me get the full screen here. Okay, well, as Corey mentioned, my name is Bob Robichaud. I'm a warning preparedness meteorologist with the Canadian Hurricane Center. We're located in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'll show you a map of that in just 1 second here. But what I'm going to talk about quickly here this evening is just kind of give you an overview of the Canadian Hurricane Center and how tropical cyclones behave when they reach Canada. Not just Canada, but the same would apply for New England as well. Then we'll just end up with just going over some of the amateur radio operations at the Canadian Hurricane Center. So as I mentioned, we're located in actually in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, which is just across the harbor from Halifax. It's considered all of Halifax regional municipality now. And this is the building that we're in. And when Julio was showing the former Hurricane Center, we have a very similar story. We used to be located on the 19th floor of this building called Queen Square in downtown Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. And when Hurricane 1 blew in 2003, this building was actually swaying, and to the point where people were getting nauseous on the top floor. So, and when the power went out, they couldn't pump water up to the top floor, so we had to actually move down. We're now located on the bottom floor of this building, so much more resilient now as a result of Hurricane 1 in 2003. We're not there to essentially kind of duplicate the work of the National Hurricane Center in Miami. We do monitor all tropical activity in the Atlantic Ocean, but we're there to provide storm-specific bulletins and information on impacts as it relates directly to Canada, and as I say, it can apply to New England as well. When the storm first shows a hint of threatening Canada, we would start to kind of escalate our activities 4 to 6 days prior. We would actually issue preliminary bulletins, and then when the storm is about 72 hours out or 3 days out, we'd start to issue bulletins every 6 hours on a particular storm, providing information on the location, intensity, and all that good stuff, along with the expected impacts. Once the storm, the landfall is imminent, we would, within about 12 hours or so, we would actually increase that frequency to every 3 hours to issue information statements. Our what we call our response zone is the thin line that you see that extends out about 200 miles from our marine forecast areas. And we typically get about 2 or 3 storms that at least track offshore, and about 1 or 2 will typically have some sort of an impact on our land areas here in Canada. Julio again showed the map from last year. This is kind of a zoomed-in map to show what storms actually impacted Canada. Last year there were 8 named storms. 6 of those actually made it to hurricane strength, and most of those hurricanes or former hurricanes actually made it into our response zone. And as Julio was saying, also the strongest storm was Arthur. That caused significant impacts in the maritime provinces. People were without power for about as long as about 2 weeks as a result of mostly the tree damage and power infrastructure damage as a result of Arthur. Now looking at for this year, the forecast is that was issued by NOAA back in May, is calling for 6 to 11 named storms. 6 to 3 would actually make it to hurricane status, and up to 2 of those hurricanes would make it to category 3, 4, or 5, which is considered a major hurricane. And you can see how these numbers compare to average. The average number of named storms in a year in the last 30 years, which is kind of the average that we look at, is around 12. So you can see some of these numbers are below average in terms of the number of storms. Now, why is that? Why is the forecast predicted to be below average? This is a map showing essentially water temperature anomaly, or the difference in water temperature right now as it relates to what it normally should be. And if you can see the area out here in the Atlantic, what we call our main development region, there's a patch of blue, which essentially means that this patch of water is below normal, so colder than average for this time of the year. And this map is for actually today. I got this map this morning. And then there's another area of warmer water out in the Pacific near the equator, and that is a patch of abnormally warm water. And whenever we see that scenario, it's what we call an El Nino condition. And El Nino typically results in wind shear downwind from where the El Nino is actually occurring, which is in the eastern Atlantic. So whenever we have an El Nino, it tends to cause wind shear in the tropical Atlantic. So whenever we have wind shear in the Atlantic, we tend to have fewer hurricanes. That's why the El Nino and in combination with the colder water, those are the two main reasons why the season is expected to be a little bit below average for this hurricane season. Now, this is a map, again, taken this morning of a satellite representation of current water temperature. And you can see which areas have the warm water right now in the Gulf of Mexico and off the southeastern coast of the U.S. So we've already had 3 named storms this year. Claudette actually formed last week and made landfall up in Newfoundland and Labrador, caused some brief heavy downpours, but otherwise no damage there. So this is probably the area you're going to see these storms actually develop over the coming weeks, whatever storms actually do develop. So even in a year where there is an El Nino resulting in more shear and resulting in lower hurricane numbers, you could still get these periods of low shear, and that's the window of opportunity where you can have a storm, and sometimes a very significant storm, forming in the Atlantic Ocean. And again, the good example which Julio gave earlier was of Andrew back in 1992. Now, up here in the northern latitudes, New England and Atlantic Canada, there's a couple of things that we know happen to these things as they approach. One is that in the case of a purely tropical system, the wind and the rain around the system are fairly symmetric. So it's windy on both sides and there's heavy rain on both sides. One of the things that we know happens is that the storm starts to accelerate when it curves up towards the northeast and into Atlantic Canada. Not only does the storm start speeding up, but it increases in size. It increases in size, and the rain actually starts to shift to the left-hand side of the track. So what happens is you end up with a storm that has asymmetric wind or much stronger wind on the right-hand side as opposed to the left-hand side, because you have to add the forward motion of the storm on the right-hand side and subtract it from the circulation of the storm on the left-hand side. So you end up with a storm that's, first of all, larger, it's moving faster, and the winds are much stronger on the right-hand side than the left-hand side. However, most of the rain is located on the left-hand side of the track. So this is a typical scenario of tropical cyclones when they start to curve up and move up towards New England or into Atlantic Canada. And a good example was Irene back in 2011, and Rob will remember this quite clearly, all the flooding that occurred up in Vermont where I went to school. And there were very strong winds in Massachusetts. However, there wasn't a whole lot of rain on that side of the track. So strong winds on the right, heavy rain on the left. And this is kind of the threat areas that we look at when these storm approaches our area. Now, with the strong winds on the right-hand side, this is where you're going to get your highest surge and your largest waves. And we have a particular scenario where we get extraordinarily large waves because the storm is accelerating. This is not something you're gonna see down in the tropics or in the Gulf of Mexico. The waves that are generated by an accelerating storm are larger and can be larger than a Category 5 hurricane. And this is one of the things that we deal with a lot, and we have to educate our people that are the public going down to the beach. When we're forecasting a hurricane and we're forecasting large waves, that attracts a lot of people to the coastline, and we lose people almost every year of people getting too close to the rocks, and then you get into these situations where these large waves are approaching. And just to show you an idea of how quickly these waves can actually arrive upon you, this is a Gonzalo from last year that approached an area called Placentia Bay in Newfoundland and Labrador. So has all this open ocean to build up these extraordinary wave heights, and this is about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. Wave heights were only about 3 meters, or about 8 or 9 feet. Within about an hour, they rose from 8 or 9 feet to about 35 feet in about an hour. So if you consider someone at the coast on some rocks looking at the waves, very rapidly they can get into a very dangerous situation. So this is just one of the differences in some of the hazards that we deal with tropical cyclones in our area. So I'll just finish off with talking a little bit about amateur radio operations at the Hurricane Center. We operate something called CANWARN. It was established in 1987 and modeled after SkyWarn in the U.S. And we've kind of modified CANWARN operations in the few years since then. At the Hurricane Center, the Nova Scotia Amateur Radio Association donated a brand new VHF radio for the Canadian Hurricane Center, and we installed a computer with Echolink capabilities there. And of course, I got my license a few years ago, back in 2010, and we were off and running from there. In 2010, we had 2 landfalling hurricanes here in Atlantic Canada, while there were actually none in the U.S. So we were active right off the bat as soon as we got that radio. And some of the other things we've been involved with is increased presence on the VoIP hurricane net. One of our guys did some work as net control on there. We participated in some of the communications tests with WX4 NHC. We hold some tropical weather review and training sessions for folks every year, usually in June. We had one just a couple of weeks ago, or last week, I think it was. And then last year during Arthur, through the Hurricane WatchNet infrastructure, we actually had 2 forecasters. One from the Canadian Hurricane Center, and myself and Chris Fogarty here at the Hurricane Center in Halifax talked to Dan Brown, who was the forecaster on duty at the National Hurricane Center. So we got 2 forecasters from both centers communicating through an amateur radio infrastructure. So it was kind of neat there, and of course we exchange all kinds of information during actual storm events. And I'll just finish with this. I gave this example a couple of times before, where we had Hurricane Earl approaching back in 2010. That was one of the hurricanes that made landfall. And we knew the storm was going to be very close to hurricane strength as it approached the coast of Nova Scotia. And in the early morning hours of September 4th, the storm was coming up. And we got this report from a CANWARN amateur radio operator who reported winds of 45 miles per hour gusting to 61 at that location. Given the structure of the storm at that time, we knew that if that particular location was reporting those winds, we knew that the winds were much stronger just offshore and to the right of the track, and they would definitely be in that hurricane category. So we knew that we had a hurricane based on the report that we got, this key report that came in from an amateur radio operator, and our forecasters actually included in the subsequent reports and storm summaries that came after the storm was over. So we had a number of reports that came in as a result of the activation for that particular hurricane. And you can never tell ahead of time exactly how your report is going to be. In this case, I know that this amateur radio operator had no idea that they would actually confirm that it was a hurricane before the hurricane actually got here. And I was working in the Provincial Emergency Operations Center at the time, and we were able to confirm the hurricane was indeed hurricane strength at a Category 1 hurricane before it made landfall, and we managed to take some action as a result of that report. So it just goes to show that you never really know when the report will be a key piece of information that forecasters are looking for. So just to echo what Julio was saying earlier about the importance of amateur radio observations and how it fits into the whole hurricane response process. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Corey, and you can take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Bob. We did have one question that came up. Can you give kind of a description of HF capability at the Canadian Hurricane Center?
Yeah, I can, because we don't have any right now. One of the things we've been talking about, we have VHF and Echolink right now. One of the things because especially the fact that we're on that lower floor, it makes it a little tougher now to have HF capabilities within the Hurricane Center. However, when we do activate, our net controllers are also on HF, and they share the information, and eventually that information gets into us. But we don't have actual HF capabilities within the center, at least not yet, but we're looking at ways we can potentially do that by either setting up a temporary station and having amateur radio operators come in and take observations within the center or something like that. But as of right now, we don't have HF capabilities within the center.
Okay, great, thank you. And another question, do you have a relationship with CFARS?
Sorry, say again?
The question, let me see if we can get some clarification, but the question is, do you have a relationship with CFARS, Charlie Fox Alpha Romeo Sierra? Let me see if I can get a clarification from the Canadian version of Mars. There we go.
No, we don't have any formal relationship with them as of yet.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay.
Just a little question for you, Corey. Sure. Did you get any response of any Victor Echo or Victor any other Canadian stations on the webinar?
I had one ask, and I'm presuming that the person asking about CFARS may as well be a Canadian. But we do have a VE1 VE1RG is on board, and just got a message passing greetings from Puerto Rico to you. So yeah, it looks like we have a few more on board.
Yeah, I imagine there are a few on there. So yeah, that's good. All right, thanks, Corey.
Okay, thank you. All right, and give me just a second. I'll take the screen back here, and we had a couple more Twitter handles to follow. NHC Atlantic, NHC Surge, and the NHC Director's Twitter feed. And somebody asked about Twitter at WX4NHC. I checked with Julio. At the moment, they don't, neither Twitter or Facebook. Part of it is you got to just, you also have to factor in manpower as well. And, when they're operational, they've got, they're putting their focus on their amateur radio resources. So unfortunately, not enough at the moment to go around to handle the social media side as well. But I do know VoIP WeatherNet and us, and if we see something trending on there that Julio and the guys there need to be aware of, we definitely pass that on to them. So I did send a couple, and one other late entry to this is NHC_Pacific as well, and it was a good point was brought up, and I sent it out through the chat feature to everybody. You know, El Nino increases storm activity in the Pacific, particularly for Hawaii, and this season we've seen a lot of activity in the central and western Pacific, northern Marianas, Guam, and Hawaii, all seeing a lot of activity. So that's something else to keep in mind. I didn't get a chance to get somebody from the Central Pacific Hurricane Center on. We may keep that in mind for next year, but also we're trying to keep time in mind as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Rob Macedo, KD1CY, with VoIP WeatherNet, and Rob's also going to give us a little bit of meteorological information on the season. So Rob, you should be unmuted, and give me just a second. I'll pass the screen over to you.
All right, sounds good, Mike. Hope you hear me okay.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, well, it's really good to be here again at another hurricane webinar here, and I want to thank Mike for hosting it and keeping the VoIP Hurricane Net in mind, and good to be with such a distinguished group of speakers here. So I know Bob already talked a little bit about the meteorological overview, but I'm going to hit a couple of quick points of interest for the season, particularly from that preparedness perspective. First of all, here's the hurricane seasonal outlook. 6 to 11 named storms, 3 to 6 hurricanes, 0 to 2 major hurricanes, a below normal season from NOAA, as Bob mentioned. The factors are El Nino, lower temperatures in the main development region of the Atlantic. Here's a couple of links in the presentation where you can get more details on the outlook, and the outlook I believe will be updated next month. I also want to mention Dr. Gray and Philip Klotzbeck, who's actually a Massachusetts native. They also do hurricane forecasting with Colorado State University. Very similar forecast, as you can see, 8 named storms, 3 hurricanes, 1 major hurricane, citing the similar factors as NOAA did. Again, their outlook will also be updated again in August 2015. But hurricanes are still a threat for this year. So I have a couple of example maps here, one of which I actually recalled from Dr. Knabb's presentation at the National Hurricane Conference. And incidentally, he mentioned the importance of amateur radio in the general session of the conference. So when Julio mentions his support for amateur radio, he has reinforced that in words. He stayed for half of the amateur radio workshop at the Hurricane Conference and mentioned amateur radio at the general session. One of the things that he pointed out was the map at the top right-hand corner of the screen. This shows 2 landfalling hurricanes in 1983 when we only had 4 named systems. You can see here Hurricane Alicia, which was a major impact through especially with the landfall in Texas, and I believe the other one was Barry that also had impact. So, you know, and both of those impacts were in Texas. So just a couple of things to note here. And again, this was a season of only 4 named systems. And then down in the right-hand corner, of course, 1992, Hurricane Andrew. And one of the things I'd like to point out in both the Andrew case in 1992, the tropical systems from 1983 that made landfalls, whereas they developed in areas that were a bit north of that development region. I mean, Andrew did start out in that main development region, halfway between Africa and the Caribbean islands, but it almost lost organization completely because of that El Nino. But as you can see, it kind of got north of those Caribbean islands, and once it did that, it was really able to explode with those warm water temperatures in the Bahamas and being away from the effects of El Nino. So keep that in mind. While we may have a lighter season, this was a season of 7 named storms in 1992. We can't let our guard down. We have to be ready. We could see, you know, a landfalling system or 2 in the U.S. or even up the East Coast and into Canada. It just depends on where the system forms, how close it is to the U.S., and what are the steering currents. And if it can get away from the effects of El Nino in particular, that can make the systems more dangerous. If we look at the 3 systems that we've had this year, they've all been higher latitude systems that have formed well away from the effects of El Nino. The local forecast office here at the National Weather Service in Taunton, where we do our CANWARN operations for southern New England, the words they're using is beware of the Bahama-type systems because they can get into that warm water, they're away from the effects of El Nino, and they could pose a threat anywhere by going through Florida and the Gulf or up the East Coast. So something to keep in mind. Hurricanes are still a threat this year, even though we're expecting a below normal season. So for more information, these are just some links on the different, on the Hurricane Center, the Hurricane Watch Net, the VOIP Hurricane Net, some other alternate links, and some preparedness information for folks to review. One thing I'll mention on the National Hurricane Center website, if you go under the top news of the day, they are looking at revamping the website a bit, kind of making the look similar to a lot of the local forecast offices as well as the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, and they are looking for feedback. So check out nhc.noaa.gov for that information, and here's an opportunity for the amateur radio community to give some feedback on their website. So with that, we'll give a quick overview on the VOIP Hurricane Net for this year's webinar. And our mission has been to provide real-time or near real-time measured weather data, damage reports, and any other situational awareness or disaster intelligence information that we can gather. And we kind of utilize the CANWARN reporting criteria for the types of information that we want to hear. We want to provide a means of interoperability for any emergency operations centers, non-governmental organizations, different National Weather Service forecast offices to communicate with the Hurricane Center, communicate between each other. Echolink and IRLP can provide that means to get into those VHF nets that we wouldn't be able to get into otherwise. And while there's certainly the infrastructure, and if we lose a lot of infrastructure, those means can go down, we can get information while those means are up. And in some cases, we've been able to get information even when areas have been very hard hit by tropical systems. And we'll talk a little bit about that near the end of the presentation here. We like to get liaisons from other nets, so I know some folks, they may want to keep their CANWARN net local, not connect up into our net directly, but if you can send some liaisons our way from your CANWARN net, that's very helpful. Any way we can work with local folks, we'll do anything we can within the technology and within our resources to work with everybody. We also disseminate the National Hurricane Center's advisories and updates as needed. We are on the WX_talk conference, node 7203, IRLP reflector 9219, and you see some of our backup capabilities if that system goes down on the slide. Our activation policy is to activate whenever WX4NHC activates, and we have Echolink and IRLP stations or nodes in the area or any other means to gather information. And I'm going to talk about some ways we have gathered information that's been critical to WX4NHC, some of which has not always been through amateur radio, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The VOIP Hurricane Net, we have self-activated in cases where we've had strong tropical storms that have teetered on hurricane strength. We have sometimes activated in those situations in case reports are needed. And if any agency wants to use our net or resources, we are open to activating in those situations as well. We do have a net that meets on the non-hurricane season months of December through May. It's on the first Saturday of each month. And the prep net is scaled up to weekly during hurricane season. So we are weekly now at 0000 hours UTC, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The net provides a forum for technical questions. Sometimes we cover training topics. We've done some net control training either in special sessions or within our net. The actual activation nets are run quite a bit differently, but this is an opportunity to meet with folks and tell folks that we're out there, test out the system, practice some net control skills. That's what the purpose of the net is. VOIPWX.net is our website, and we meet on the same system for both this net and for activations. So I want to go through, as our last slide here, just a few highlights on the VoIP Hurricane Net support in recent years. Certainly Hurricane Tomas impact over the Caribbean islands of St. Lucia and St. Vincent in 2010. The reports that we were able to gather, and many of these reports actually came from a website of storm bloggers from the Caribbean, from stormcarib.com. And believe it or not, actually a couple of those folks that we had messages with during that were also ham radio operators. And we were able to gather information that we wouldn't have been able to gather otherwise. And those reports were mentioned in National Hurricane Center advisories as it was going through that area. And you know, may have been very unorthodox, may have been, wow, how they were able to get the reports in with internet infrastructure. But the bottom line is we got them the information, and that's what we're willing to do. We do whatever we can to get nuggets of information to the Hurricane Center and to their forecasters. And we talk about our ability to be there when all else fails. The other thing I think we need to trumpet our skill sets for is that we are the original form of social media. And we are probably the best at also managing the more modern forms of social media. And all that storm blogging site is another form of modern social media, as is Facebook and Twitter. So I think this is another way we can expand our skills and support operations, even if communications infrastructure stays up. There is always a thirst for information from a situational awareness disaster intelligence perspective. And I'm sure when Dennis records his presentation, he can take that one step further, but wanted to mention that here this evening. Hurricane Tropical Storm Irene in 2011. Wide impact from the Carolinas all the way up into our area of New England. I'm from the New Bedford, Mass area. We were able to kind of combine our Echolink and IRLP network with the VoIP Hurricane Net to funnel a lot of information up to the Hurricane Center directly. We did this for Irene, and we did this for Hurricane Sandy as well. Reports were mentioned in the NHC advisories during these systems, and that's what we're trying to do. Again, give a flow of information from the local level to the regional level to the national level in a way that is seamless and works for everybody. And every local area is different. So some folks, you know, we can make that large network. Others, it may be easier to do it with liaisons. We want to do it in a way that works best for the local areas affected because they have a lot on their plate to deal with, but also be able to provide that service if we can. Another example, Hurricane Isaac and its impact on Louisiana in August 2012. The Crescent City Amateur Radio Group and the N50ZG repeater system, since Gustav in 2008, they've been a great group of folks, and they've worked with us now in several hurricanes. And we've had their net and their local repeater active and connected to our net, both for the regular VoIP prep net, but also during hurricanes. And during Isaac, it was a very challenging one because even though it was a Category 1 system, the system hung around for a while and kept causing damage, wind damage over the area, multiple high tide cycles affected. Isaac's impact, while a Category 1 system, was more significant because it hung around and caused quite a number of extensive damage and storm surge reports because of its, the fact that it did hang around. And their group and their reports were also used in Hurricane Center advisories, and they were the link to knowing what was going on in the New Orleans area and other parts of southeast Louisiana. And this is the type of connectivity we're looking for, and the repeater was able to stay up and on the system throughout the entire hurricane. So just an example of where this can be effective. And then Hurricane Arthur support in July 2014. We had the Weather Service in Newport, Morehead City, North Carolina on the network. They provided some reports to us during that. And then finally, Hurricane Gonzalo support in mid-October 2014. So it was a strong tropical storm in Antigua and Anguilla and St. Martin and St. Bart's. And we were able to gather a number of reports from some of the hands on Antigua and Anguilla. We were monitoring weather stations on Weather Underground in some of those same areas, including St. Bart's, where weather station data seemed to show the eye go right over St. Bart's. And then in Bermuda, we didn't have our normal amateur radio contacts there. However, again, through that stormkrib.com storm blogging site, we were able to make contact with someone on Bermuda. We had constant contact with her through an app called WhatsApp, and that company was recently bought by Facebook. It's basically a messaging system via cell phone using its own messaging infrastructure. It stayed up during the whole hurricane. We got a lot of reports from her, including some storm damage pictures after the storm had passed. So just another example, again, not traditional amateur radio, so to speak, but a way our net was effective in gathering reports. We also monitored various weather stations on the island until they were no longer active on the net. So these are the ways we try to support the Hurricane Center and support our activations. Our effectiveness, though, is based on having that connectivity to the local level by whatever means possible, whether it's Echolink, IRLP, relays from HF if they cannot get to the nets on the U.S. due to propagation, via different internet tools, whatever it takes to get the report into the hands of the operators at WX4 NHC and the hurricane specialists is what we're trying to go after here. So with that, these are just the links of our website, our social media, some Echolink and IRLP resources. And if you're interested in being a net control for our net or other information on the VOIP Hurricane Prep Net, you can contact me at my email address, katie1cy@voipwx.net. And with that, that concludes my presentation. And thanks again for having me speak again, and I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Sorry for the delay there. I was catching up on a few housekeeping chores here. Thank you, Rob, for the presentation. And I think we had a couple people that will be contacting you. I got a couple questions on how to participate, so you should be hearing from them. I didn't receive any specific questions, Rob, but I did get a couple follow-ups for Julio and Bob, so I'm going to get them back online. Let me get the presenter changed around here, and there we go. I think I've been hitting one extra button, and that's been causing the hiccup going back to my screen, so I think we got that solved. So let me mute you, Rob, bring Julio and Bob back up. And I did get a question for you guys on backup power at your respective hurricane centers. Julio, do you want to start with talking about backup power that they use for amateur radio purposes?
Sure. We have 3 backup generators in its own building, and it has enough fuel for about 3 weeks of running the entire building, including air conditioning and all of the radar equipment for 3 weeks. So that's basically it. And they test it, I believe it's once a week. They do a live test, and you will know because they'll do an announcement, and you might see a blink of the lights. And then we also have a pretty sophisticated UPS system that fills in the gap between the generators coming up full throttle to make sure that there's no brownouts or gaps in the power there.
Okay, thank you. Bob?
Very similar at the Canadian Hurricane Center. If you remember the picture that I showed of the building, we're not the sole occupants of that building. So I have been at the Hurricane Center in Miami, and they're pretty much self-contained into that building. But we do have a fairly substantial UPS, and we also have a generator that's good for a few days, not a few weeks. So we have the one generator, and it's good for several days, and we do have contracts with fuel companies to come up and refuel the generator in case we need that, and we've had to use it before. And we also do a test every week, every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. is when the generator kicks in and it runs for a half an hour, and like it happens every week. So do have backup power. The entire floor that houses the Canadian Hurricane Center is on backup power if required.
Okay, great, thanks. For this next question, I'm actually going to kind of go down the list of presenters here because I think we've all got some different perspectives on this question. And it's regards to amateurs that live outside of a hurricane-prone area, maybe in the Midwest, out in the western United States, or in maybe central Canada, the Plains, Ontario, Quebec, out on the west coast. What ways can they be involved in a hurricane response from an amateur radio perspective in support of your respective centers, programs, and organizations? And Sean, I'm going to start with you since I haven't bugged you for a good 45 minutes or so.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Any amateur that is outside of a hurricane area is going to have some variety of natural disaster threat or some sort of public service concerns that they can work on to be prepared for natural disasters and other events in their own area. I'm from central Illinois, so I'm very used to everything from severe thunderstorms and tornadoes to serious winter ice events. So back home in Illinois, I've got plenty of opportunity for me to work on my preparedness skills and keep my communications capabilities up to par. If you're looking for more information or more ways that you can provide assistance than that, I'm certain that being able to relay messages to in and out of hurricane-affected areas is going to be a big help. You've already heard of several different ways that you can provide assistance to numerous organizations that presented here tonight. So if you're interested in being of service during a hurricane and you don't live in a hurricane area, you have a lot of opportunity to be of service.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Rob?
Okay, so just I guess a few ways to be helpful during hurricane events. I think Sean had some good points. Certainly, we are always looking for net controls on the VoIP net side, and I'm sure that's true with the Hurricane Watch net as well. And it's great to have multiple people in other time zones participating and helping with activations. It's a great way to cover shifts and such. Also, think out of the box a little bit. We can use folks to be able to monitor some of the information that we're trying to gather via social media from various outlets. And we can provide that information to the Hurricane Center, and it can be sorted and dealt with. And I know there are certainly those that want to put out misinformation via social media, but I think there's a lot of good information out there as well. Having more folks being able to do that is very helpful. And if you have family that live in hurricane-prone areas and they're being affected by one, getting information from them about what's going on in their area can also be very helpful. I mean, I can recall also during Hurricane Gustav some Mid-Atlantic amateurs who had contacts with storm chasers that were in the area during Hurricane Gustav and were relaying information to us. That's another way folks can help us. So just hands in those areas as well. That's another way you can spread the word and get them involved with us. Back to you, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Julio.
Certainly. Well, hams, no matter where they are, can help, and of course, specifically on HF by relaying, stations in the affected area that no one else can hear, and that happens all the time. I mean, one good example was Hurricane Fabian, which I believe was a Category 4 that hit Bermuda in the middle of the night. It was probably about 1 in the morning, and propagation from Bermuda to Florida or to most of the southeast was almost nil. And we had a Canadian ham up there in Quebec, and he relayed for hours that night from our friends in Bermuda and got incredible information during their landfall, and then some of the damage when the bridge went out and things like that. So relaying is definitely, we need them everywhere. We used to have relays all the way from California where we couldn't hear stations, and sailboats out at sea that we couldn't hear directly, and we depended sometimes on 2 relays to bring the information back and forth. So that's the main that's the most important thing for, don't think that you have to be in a hurricane area to be able to participate and help. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Julio. Bob, want to go ahead? Bob, are you there?
Okay, I hit the camera study on. Yeah, I echo what Julio and Rob said. There's a lot of opportunity for relaying information. We had a storm. I believe it was about 4 years ago, and the net controller on the VoIP hurricane net was actually located in Minnesota. Very similar example to what Julio just gave, where you can have a net controller that's actually quite ways removed from where the action is actually happening. The other thing that comes to mind is when we're talking about inland areas. When I mentioned how these tropical cyclones behave when they start to accelerate and move up into the northern latitudes, you can still have some very significant damage as a result of what we call a post-tropical storm, or a storm that started out as tropical but transitioned to something that looks more like a winter storm. Now, there's a couple of examples that come to mind. Ike back a few years ago that came up the Ohio Valley caused a tremendous amount of wind damage as a result of the track and the strong winds. And one of our deadliest storms here in Canada actually occurred in southern Ontario, and it was extensive flooding as a result of hazel back in 1954. So even though you may not live near the coast, even areas that are fairly far inland can see some very significant impacts from tropical weather systems. So it's not just the coast that can be affected by some of these storms, and folks in Vermont and Quebec as well back in 2011 with Irene. So that's one of the things that came to mind to the relay, and also people being affected that may not think they can be affected by these storms.
Okay, thank you, Bob. And I'll add my 2 cents on top of everybody else's. I'm not going to repeat what some of the things, but I will kind of hit on some very important points that other presenters made. There's always a need for relay stations. Propagation doesn't always favor us. We learned that during Hurricane Sandy, and I'm sure Julio and Rob remember trying to find the right combination of HF propagation to work, and I think that was also the case during Irene as well. Another thing to keep in mind, if you look at Hurricane Isaac a couple of years ago that came in, affected primarily Louisiana, very slow-moving storm, dumped a lot of rain. It meant that HF nets in that area, it could be a section net, a traffic net, an Aries net, whatever. You're getting into long duration operations here, and you're going to burn out net control stations right and left. Sometimes you have to think outside the box, going back to what I said earlier, where everything is the amateur radio community works together as a whole during times like this. We found a great resource during Hurricane Isaac was the contest stations. These guys are good. They got good ears. They have top of the line stations. They're used to keeping their butt in the chair for a long period of time. They understand propagation, and a lot of them got their start either in Aries or traffic handling or something like that. Don't underestimate contesters and DXers. These guys are tremendous, tremendous resources. especially during hurricane season. They understand a lot about amateur radio, about operating, about station building, and it's a huge resource. Never exclude a group of amateurs just because you think they may not be interested, or just because they don't have all the ICS certificates that you do. You know, it's everything is in the toolbox when it's time to respond to a big event. And Sean just brought up a good point. Big antennas here, weak stations. If you've ever listened to a contest pile up from somebody like K3LR and you hear who he's working, you notice you don't hear a lot of the stations he's working. Well, he's got the big antennas that can reach out and pull those stations in. So never underestimate those guys. The inland effects that I think Bob mentioned and others, you know, Hurricane Irene is a good example of how a storm ends up becoming a tremendous problem far inland where folks don't normally think about hurricane response. It created tremendous flooding in Vermont, upstate New York. So you're going to have a lot of information being shared between a National Weather Service response through a forecast office and the hurricane community. Finally, on getting other folks involved, don't forget social media. You know, let's borrow an idea from the VOST teams, and for those not familiar with it, it's a virtual operations support team. And this is kind of like your social media monitors and managers during a big event. You know, if you've got really good skills with Twitter, Facebook, anything like that, start using those skills to gather some situational awareness that can be passed on to folks. You could be anywhere in the world and do that if you know what you're looking for. So with that, I'm going to kind of wrap things up. I don't see any questions pending, although I know I've got a few that I didn't get to. One person asked about WinLink at WX4NHC. Yes, they do. They've been on since 1993. WX4NHC at winlink.org. I've seen another question here in pending. We're going to have to probably refer that to. I'll tell you what, I'm going to open a mic. I'm going to pitch this question. This will be the last one of the night because we are way over on time right now. And Bob, I think maybe this might be for you. Question is, how significant is the Saharan dust effect of inhibiting storm development this year, along with the El Nino phenomena?
It was a factor earlier in the season. I haven't looked at anything specific lately on that to see just things stand there. I guess one of the main things that we were looking at was the ocean temperature and, of course, the El Nino, and the fact that there is high pressure over the Atlantic right now that is causing things to remain fairly calm. There was significant dust earlier in the season, but as I say, I haven't checked lately to see if it's been increasing or decreasing.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Okay, with that, I think we've gotten through most of the questions. We've gotten some nice remarks from the audience. Thank you for the comments, everybody. I'm going to go down the list of presenters to see if you got any closing thoughts before we put the bow on this tonight. Bob, anything on your end?
No, just thanks. Thank you, Mike and ARRL for having us, the Canadian Hurricane Center, on your webinar this evening. It was a lot of fun, and hope to do it again soon.
Okay, thank you, Bob, and thank you for also to all the RAC guys that are joining us tonight and everybody else north of the border. Julio, any closing thoughts?
Yes, be prepared. You never know what's going to happen. Hurricane Andrew was not supposed to hit South Florida. It was supposed to go north of us. And about a day and a half before it hit, the city went crazy and people were even tearing down their wood fence to put over their windows. So it's better to be prepared, not use it, than try to rush later.
Absolutely. What do they say? Prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Rob, any closing comments?
Not too much else to add. I think some of the points made about the tropical storms and how far inland they can get, and as post-tropical systems, they can have big impacts on areas that you don't necessarily think of as hurricane prone. So, good, something great to keep in mind. And again, even though it's supposed to be a below-average season, it doesn't mean someone along our U.S. coast or Canadian coast or down in the Caribbean, Mexico, etc., won't be impacted. So we have to remain vigilant. And thank you again, Mike, for letting us at the VOIP Hurricane Net and myself present tonight. I think it was a great webinar and great to be with the distinguished group of colleagues here. Back to you, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Sean, any closing thoughts?
Just the reminder that we've all heard a lot of great scientific and emergency preparedness information here tonight, but remember that the role of the public information officer in getting the activity of your group out to the media and to the general public is an exceptionally important role in your group. When a disaster strikes, we need to make sure that not only do we do a good job in providing the communication services, but we need to make sure that the outside world knows about what we're doing. And with that, I'll say 73, and thanks for having us.
Okay, thank you, Sean. And now my screen decided to go into fits again. Okay, just a few closing thoughts. I want to first off thank you to everybody, all the presenters tonight, for doing such a fantastic job and sharing their knowledge and expertise with us all. I want to thank you all for attending. Let's hope that this is a quiet and safe hurricane season. And as everybody have said, stay vigilant. Keep an eye on all the news feeds on current hurricane forecasts, and make sure you're prepared as well. And first and foremost, make sure your family and loved ones are prepared. Your first duty is to stay safe and make sure your loved ones are safe. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you for sticking around so late tonight. Hope everybody has a wonderful week. This will be posted later on in the week. And thanks again, everybody. And 73 from Newington and League headquarters.